Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Everybody excited? Right, welcome to the Stags and ACM Letting Seminar. It is great to see so many of you here. We did the last one in 2018. We couldn't quite believe it was that long ago, but obviously due to COVID and everything else that's happened in between, this is the first round of seminars that we've done for, since that 2018 year. So, and as ever with lettings, there's always so much to learn. There's things that are changing all the time. There's things that are around the corner. There's always an appetite for a bit of knowledge. So we always think these are good value. Looking at the numbers, I'm beginning to wish we charged. What do you think, David? So the format, hopefully you've all come in, you've all registered, you've all ticked off, you've all got a pack. Within the pack there's a little agenda which I'll just very quickly run through in a moment. We're going to try, we've got a lot to get through. And by the nature of it, we're just not going to have enough time to get into detail with all the aspects of certainly things like the Renters Reform Bill and that type of thing. But we're just trying to give an overview and a summary of what's happening, what's around the corner. And then obviously there's an opportunity for a short sort of question and answer session. But probably, we can answer and discuss things maybe later on this evening or at a different time when we want to get into a bit more detail. So I'm going to sit down in a moment, which I know you'll be very pleased about. Just a few housekeeping things. They told me to mention fire escapes. If the fire alarm goes off, just run, panic, do whatever you can, but get out as quickly as possible. Just all head for the exits. I'm not sure where they are, but there's one back there, but I'm sure that won't trouble us, but just in case there is, just all run as quickly as possible. You've hopefully had some tea and coffee. When we finish, there will be some food. Yes, we don't spare any expense. There will be some food. And another opportunity to have a drink at the end. When you walked in, you saw a little competition board, I think. So we've got a little competition running. Guess the value of the rental value of the 4 properties. Hopefully you've wanted to go at that. We're going to do the draw for that at the end to win that very large bottle of bubbly. So we'll do that afterwards. This evening, I'm delighted that we have Amanda Gunter from ACM who will be presenting the tax section of the presentation this evening. To follow me in a moment is Claire Parle, who assists me in running the lettings department for Stags, running over all the various offices and departments. So she does all the work and I sometimes get the credit, but she's going to present the first bit. I'll do a little bit in the middle and then we'll go on to Amanda, then we'll finish up with question and answer. We are filming it tonight because there's lots of people that couldn't attend tonight and they've asked that we send a link and they send a video or a film of it so that they can catch up with it at their leisure. And again, if you want more information at the end, then we can provide you with that link so that you can revisit bits you might have missed. I'm also delighted at the back of the room we have the NFU who will try and sell you some insurance, no doubt, and Envirovent, and they're 2 parties that you may be interested to have a chat to, connected to the lettings industry and landlords and property. So by all means, and thank you for them for coming tonight. But I think, the other thing, Claire, anything else I've missed? I usually miss some feedback form. In your pack there's a feedback form. Whether it's good or bad, provide a bit of feedback. It helps us to know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. Undoubtedly we'll probably have these bit more often, especially with what's coming around the corner. So it's good just to provide a bit of feedback so we know where we are. Right, that I think is enough for me for a little while. I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who's just going to run through the first part of the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. I'm told I've got the nice bit of the presentation, but you'll have to tell me when we finish. So I thought I'd kick off initially. Oh, always a technical. That's me, as Andrew introduced. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stags, a little bit in general about the private rented sector, and then touch on the current market and what's happening now. So a bit about Stags. I've only got one slide on this. So 22 offices covering 4 counties and the London office. So we're spread across the 4 counties of the West Country with 22 offices. Actually established in 1874. So actually next year, 2024, we celebrate our 150 years. So that's a big one. We've got 10 dedicated lettings departments. So across those offices, there's 10 dedicated teams dealing solely with letting, and that's 36 staff. So those people are only dealing with lettings and dedicated to that bit of the business. Fully licensed, ALA members, RICS and TDS. Hands up here, who knows what ALA is? ALA, the Association of Residential Lettings Agents. So all of us that are here are either qualified or looking to be qualified, and that means from your point of view, you know that you're putting your property in the hands of an agent that is trusted, follows particular codes of conduct, and knows what they're doing. So we're always updated and know what's happening in the market and able to advise you. We're actually managing and letting a portfolio of over 3,000 properties. So that includes those that not only our department residential lettings are letting, but also those for our professional and estate management teams. So it's a real broad mix of variation of property. Over 65% of our portfolio, so that's those properties that we're managing, are actually modern 2 and 3 bedroom properties, most likely investments that are actually in towns and cities. Lots of people probably know Stags from a rural point of view. They know that we have markets, we sell tractors and probably let the big country houses, but actually we're doing, you know, over half or 65% are town and city properties owned by investors for those people that look at those areas. So another maybe surprising fact. So moving on to the private rented sector. Renting, is some of you may be surprised to know, is actually not only it's not a last resort for people anymore. They're actually doing it as a lifestyle choice. It gives them the flexibility and often at a lower cost than if they were going out to purchase a property. You'll see, and as this slide shows, there was a definite increase here from 96 into the early 2000s, where we went from 2 million households in the private rented sector to 4.7 million households. It's stabilised, and as you can see, varies very little over the last 10 years. So market update, what's happening now? It's probably what a lot of you are keen to know. I mean, the Southwest is obviously a really desirable location. As we saw during the COVID years, people were looking at moving down here. They saw it as a place that they wanted to be. And we saw a massive increase in people that were looking to move here, more that were registering with us. In fact, this year compared to last year, we've actually registered, as we see there, 42% more people that are looking to rent accommodation. The surprising factor, and well, possibly not surprising, is actually 89% of those people had a budget of £1,000 per calendar month. So as we see in our talk, we'll touch on rents are increasing, actually a big proportion of those people that are looking to rent actually only have a budget of £1,000 per calendar month. So that's another interesting one. As an example, so at the moment we're in Taunton, so I've picked the Taunton example, but a 2-bedroom property in Taunton on the market at £950 per calendar month. It's currently matching to over 550 people looking. Now those people, a lot of them may have found something already. They may be just curious and sat in a rented property and looking to see what's out there. But we know if we put something on at that value in Taunton, we'll be getting interest from a wide range of people. One thing that has happened and we've seen is the demand at £1,500 per calendar month has definitely eased back. There are obviously fewer people that possibly moving to the area. They're not coming down here as much. There's different reasons why people may not be wanting. Possibly the sales market is having an impact on that as well. There aren't so many people that might have sold and be looking to move down to the West Country and maybe have the capital in the bank and not afraid to rent for a few months while they decide what to do. There's less of those. So that higher end is where we've definitely seen the demand ease. Interesting one, we look back and the last time we did a seminar was 2018. At that time, we had 214 available properties across all of our Stags offices. Today, if you look, we've got 92. So that just shows that, especially the speed at which things are letting, properties that come onto the market don't hang around very long, and that is a really significant one. We're letting anything ranging from £415 per calendar month, so that may be a studio apartment in a city or town centre, up to £6,000. In more rural locations, probably a larger property with some land. So a real variation, and we're happy to help with letting any of those. As I said, the limited availability that is out there does mean there's fewer void periods, so landlords are seeing a much quicker turnaround, probably maximum of a week to 2 weeks, rather than maybe sitting and seeing a property empty for a longer period of time. I mean, we anticipate now, as we move into the autumn winter, we know there's a bit of uncertainty on the property sales side of things, and actually we expect to see instruction from them. Also, holiday let and Airbnb. Lots of people over the past few years have switched to holiday letting being an option to occupy their property, and actually they're now seeing that with people able to go abroad again, the cost of holidaying in this country sometimes isn't as cost effective, and also you can't guarantee the weather, but they're not seeing as much occupancy, and therefore looking at other options, and long-term letting sometimes provides one of those. Rents, you've probably all heard, anyone not heard in the media that rents have increased? So we're seeing here rents have increased, so in the last 12 months, national average increased by 9.4%. That is including London, which does often distort what's happening in the true figures that we see. The Southwest average in the last 6 months was 6%. So rents here have risen on average by 6%. A few figures there that have come from HomeLet. So HomeLet are one of the big referencing agencies, and they produce figures and reports each month about the statistics of the new lets that they're dealing with. So these are new lets. So in London, you can see the average rent was $2,145. We're the second highest, 1,137. So that's the average rent in the Southwest at the moment. Wales, 842. East Midlands, 850. North East, 655. And that UK average, taking away London, is 1,051. So you can see that we're above the UK average. As I say, many statistics and things are distorted by what's happening or what you see in London. The average rent in our managed portfolio, so those properties that we're looking after on behalf of landlords, 966 per calendar month. So slightly below the average, but in comparison to 2018, when we last did a seminar, that was 794. So that increased from 794 to 966 on an average. That over 5 years, 21 to 22%. So that's what we've seen rents go up over the last 5 years. Rents are increasing, but as are tenants' expectations. So the more the tenants are paying, the more that they are expecting. So the better quality of property, the landlord dealing with maintenance, repairs, freshening up properties when they maybe are getting a little bit tired. Those tenants that are paying these higher rents are expecting more. So that's something to bear in mind. Little and often, we always say rents, it's better to review and put it up if it warrants it, little and often. Don't leave it a few years and then suddenly try and increase, because often that comes as more of a shock to a tenant than maybe if it was reviewed annually and possibly tweaked and looked at £25, £50 a month, depending on the market, of course, but that's often a better way and less frightening for a tenant. I think also what a lot of landlords have maybe forgotten, they've got a good tenant and they like to look after the tenant and the tenant's looking after the property well, but your costs have all gone up. Insurance has increased, your maintenance costs would have increased, anything like that has gone up. So also again, you need to be making sure that it's a viable, bringing in an income and looking after itself as well. So I think that's just something to remember, and a lot of people do forget. If you look at your costs compared to what they may have been 5 years ago, they will have increased. Some interesting facts. I just thought I'd throw in some statistics that are sometimes quite interesting and come as a surprise to some people. So 43% of private renters are under 35. Lots of people think that renting is only an option for someone who's 25, but actually there is, as I say, it's now becoming a lifestyle choice for a lot of other people. 42% of private renters are aged 34 to 54, and actually in the 50 plus bracket, that's increased over 5%. The average tenancy length in the private rented sector, you're looking at 54 months. Now obviously that's looking at the sector as a whole and the whole country. Our average, we look at it each year to see and monitor the length of tenancies, is 34 months. Obviously we live in an area where people do move around, there's flexibility, so tenancy length isn't quite meeting the big average, but it's still quite high, nearly 3 years. Average age of a first-time buyer, I add this in because I think it's quite relevant. Obviously lots of people rent before buying. The average age of a first-time buyer is 33. And the average deposit required is 43,500. Now, if people are obviously paying higher rents and they're trying to save for a deposit, that's going to take longer to establish. So I think they're linking in, and on average, private renters are spending 33% of their income on rent. So if you're paying your income on rent, you're trying to get to that 43,000. It's going to take a little while if you're also living and doing all the things that you enjoy doing as well. A lot of landlords often ask me, who's going to rent my property? Who is there out there that wants to rent, and why do they rent? So I thought, again, just a few points as to why people might choose to rent. As I said, people are renting while they save for a deposit because they haven't yet got that. They're not in a financial position to be able to purchase, so they might never be able to save a deposit, or then they're not in a position to be able to get a mortgage. Uncertain sales market, Again, it gives people choice, while maybe they're looking to see where they do want to invest or where they want to live or what happens with the market, they've got that choice. Job relocation, short-term work contracts, change in circumstances, all reasons again why people might need some flexibility. We laugh about it, but after Christmas in January we often see an increase, a surge in the amount of people that are looking because they've all fallen out over Christmas and they want to come, they need somewhere to rent because one's running away from the other because they've fallen out. So that's always another time. Short-term work contracts, again, employment, things have changed there and people aren't necessarily being offered permanent contracts, which again is having a knock-on and means that they need the flexibility. And as I say, the bottom point provides flexibility, which is often the reason why the aforementioned is needed. And again, we analyse from all the properties that we're letting, we're looking at where are people coming from, who are they, do they have pets, do they have children? So again, some interesting statistics from all of the properties we let last year when we looked at the people that we rented to. So 34% of them had pets, 30% had children. That's not a particularly high percentage and probably links to the fact that landlords have got a lot of choice. So at the moment when we're putting a property on, we're getting a lot of interest, which means we do a lot of viewings, which then means a landlord has choice. And probably if you all had a choice, you may choose someone that doesn't have a pet and doesn't have children. Although I'd argue that sometimes children cause more problems than pets. But then looking at average age, I've said 42 is the average age of a Stag's tenant that went into a property last year. Looking at where people come from, so 49% of tenants we let to actually came within a 5-mile radius of the office that they let the property through. So very local people. Again, a lot of landlords will choose to rent to local people if they can. So again, that choice factor coming into it, which is why it's so important. 25% came from the wider southwest area, and then we had 4% who were actually moved from outside of the UK. So people coming either back from abroad or possibly work and different reasons bringing them to the UK. So we were getting sort of tenants all over the world. So I think it's just a bit of a summary as to our tenants and what's happening now. A bit of a whistle-stop tour because I know we are under time pressure, but hopefully that was interesting. Yeah. And then I'll hand over to Andrew, who now will get to the really exciting bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. I gave it the easy bit. Right, now, I can skip that, I hate that photograph. It's going. Okay, so I think Claire's summary is really what the market is, where we are, really strong tenant demand. We let properties, if a property is on the market for very long, it's either too much money in rent or it's not in good enough condition. We went through COVID period, which was absolutely mad, hard to sustain, 100 phone calls, 200 emails for every property that came up. We're not back there, we don't want to be back there, but we are back there where undoubtedly the tenant demand far exceeds the supply, which ultimately gives you choice, and that's sort of where we are. I'm just going to run through a few sort of the landlord responsibilities bits that you probably already know about, but just to very quickly touch on those. Then we'll run on to the recent change in EPCs, which is a slight positive. And then we'll go on to the Renters Reform Bill, and we'll try and run through that, which I know many of you are probably here for, because it's the one that you read in your papers on a Sunday, that's going to affect the private renters sector in the next few years. So, just on the sort of current bits and pieces, these are things you can't avoid, they can't be ignored. You've got to do them. Increasingly over the last few years, the requirements for compliance has increased. I think there's about 160 different pieces of legislation that affects the property when you come to let it. There's a lot of things you've got to do or think about. We obviously invariably hope we can do that for you, but if you're doing it yourself, then certainly there's more to think about when you come to let a property out. EICRs, that's come in, but basically, introduced for new lets from 1st of July 2020, you've got to have an electrical safety check. On the fixed wiring, this isn't pat testing, this is on the fixed wiring of the property. It applies to all lets from the 1st of April 21. They need to be carried out every 5 years, and it's got to be satisfactory, and you've got to provide that report to the tenant. So that's something that's come in, probably something you already know about, and something that we have to deal with on every property that we come to let out. EPCs, Energy Performance Certificate, I'll come on to that probably in a bit more detail, but basically every property has got to have an EPC. When you come to market it to let, it's got to have an EPC. But I'll get on to that when I come on to the EPCs. Landlord gas safety certificate, you all know about that, but I mean, it's amazing how many people do forget it. And it's amazing how many landlords we come across when they come over, that especially on a longer term tenancy, they get the first one, but then they forget to do the renewal. And you can often find that it has lapsed. So this is a key one. If you get it wrong, you go inside. It's not a nice place to be. So you've got to get it right. It's got to be required annually. It now can be carried out 2 months before the expiry date, so that gives you a really big window in which to get it done. Often the problem with getting contractors trying to get it done by the expiry date was always difficult. Now you've effectively got a 2-month window in order to sort of fix up your gas safety check. And again, tenants must be provided with copies of all the certificates. It works. Smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, that was updated in 2022. Basically, you need smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, you need smoke alarms on each floor of your property, you need carbon monoxide alarms, and now you need a carbon monoxide alarm for a gas boiler. So if you've got a property, you rent it out, just make sure you've got them in. Hardwire the smoke alarms in, don't bother with batteries, hardwire them in, it's far easier, then you know it's done. A tenant is still responsible to make sure that it is works during the tenancy. You've got to make sure it's working at the start. When you inspect it, you need to make sure it's working. If it goes wrong, you've got to replace it. But a tenant's still got the responsibility to put the batteries in if they go wrong, or they wear down. So that's still theirs. Private water testing. I mean, if you've got a private water supply, you've got to test to make sure that it's fit for human consumption. So it's something you've got to do. So a lot of you may have private water supplies, rural properties, obviously, and you need a filter system or something to check it. And make sure that the it's serviced on a sort of regular basis. Legionella risk assessment's always a slight grey area, but I mean every property must have a Legionella risk assessment when you come to let it. There's a very low risk in private rented accommodation. It tends to be attached more to commercial properties, but invariably now you do need a Legionella risk assessment. It needs to be done by a competent person. That could be yourself. We employ a company that do all our Legionella risk assessments, the sort of recommendation really is that they're done every 18 months, 2 years. It's not a definitive date that's provided, but we would say that roughly every 2 years you probably need to redo it. Chimney sweeping, this is something that's changed over recent years slightly. It is now incumbent upon the landlord to sweep the chimney, and the landlord must pay for the sweeping of the chimney, and you must continue to sweep the chimney. It's not something you can pass on to the tenant. So that's the change. It used to be that a tenant would pay for it at the end of the tenancy or whatever, but it's something that you now as a landlord is are responsible to do and maintain. Immigration Act right to rent checks. This is something that we do for every property we reference. It's part of the whole referencing process. And the key thing is you've got to confirm that that person that's going to rent your property has the right to reside in the UK and has the right to work in the UK. So you need to confirm that. That's part of a right to rent check. And again, private landlords, it's something that maybe if they're letting their property privately, may not do a right to rent check. But it's something you've got to do. Not large volumes that we come across, but there are increasingly we're having to do that. And the key thing is that where people are coming over on short-term work visas or residency visas, that you then need to remember to do it when that visa expires to make sure that they've renewed it to be able to stay. So that's again something that is sometimes forgotten. Provision of documentation, this is really important. So you've got to make sure that you provide your tenant with certain documentation, and you've got to record the fact that you've provided your tenant with this documentation, because this documentation often forms part of an eviction process, currently under Section 21, or a court process, where they will expect for you to prove that you've provided this information. How to rent guide, it's the government how to rent guide. It gets downloaded. The thing with this, it changes all the time. They don't tell you, they don't announce it really, and then all of a sudden you'll see it's a new one. So you've got to make sure you're providing the latest how to rent guide. It changed, updated the other day. So again, we've had to redo that and reissue it. Deposit protection, prescribed information. As you all know, deposits have got to be protected in an appropriate scheme. You can't hang on to the deposit money. I'm sure none of you do. And you've got to issue prescribed information, and that's got to be provided to the tenant. You've got to prove that you provided it. Gas safety certificate we've touched on. EICR we've touched on. And again, an EPC, you've got to provide proof that it has a valid EPC, and again, you need to provide that to the tenant. So these are all things you've got to give to a tenant. We provide lots of other information to tenants, and they tend to be guidance notes, you know, how to live in the property, what to do, what not to do, how to deal with damp, how to deal with condensation. They're all guidance, but these are, you know, mandatory things that you need to provide and you know, give to your tenant. Like I say, keep a record of everything. Whenever you agree a change, whenever there's a change in the tenancy, or whether there's I mean, I know change of rent is probably more obvious, but if there's a change in the terms and conditions, a change in a special condition, then keep a record of it and make a note of when that happened and when it's valid from. What's coming? So, big fear in the private rented sector was the forthcoming change to the EPC requirements, in that it was proposed that in 2025 that all new lets would be required to achieve a minimum band of C. Currently it's E, and you have the ability to gain an exemption as long as you can prove that you've spent a degree of money, at the moment £3,500, and many properties, especially rural properties and listed properties, aren't able to meet the minimum requirements, and therefore you can apply for an exemption. So the proposal, and it's been in place for quite a while, was that this would change and it would go from an E to a C, and that the amount of money that you would need to spend before you could gain an exemption was going to go from £3,500 to £10,000. So this sent quite a lot of shockwaves through many landlords who have older properties, have properties that were struggling to meet the minimum requirements, often affecting more rural properties. So this is something that a lot of people were concerned about. But as you probably are aware, in the recent government announcement, they've now scrapped it. And they've scrapped it. They haven't said that it's moved on, and they haven't said that the date of 2025 is now 2028 or 2030. They've scrapped it. I mean, obviously, what have we got next year or the year after? Change of government? Who knows? So this is something that I'm sure will keep coming back, and is something you need to think about, and improving your property, improving the energy efficiency of your property, continuing to make those improvements to ensure that you can meet what will be an increasing minimum requirement. What it's done is taken the pressure off. The most annoying thing about this is that many landlords have made a decision to exit the market or sell a property based on this that was coming in. And I'm sure they may not have made that decision if they'd known that it wasn't going to come in for a longer period of time. But anyhow, it has been scrapped. We don't know what is going to happen around the corner. We don't know when it's going to come in. But we would say to you as a landlord, or what we would be advising our landlords, is that if you have an opportunity to buy a property that you're going to rent out, buy one that's going to be a C, if you can. If you're looking to convert an older property that you're currently renting and you want to turn that into an investment or change the investment, then you might be looking to sell the older property and buy a more modern property. But as we all know, energy efficiency, net zero, it's not going to go away, and it probably shouldn't. So therefore, it's something to be mindful of, but at least the pressure's come off, and it's something that we don't need to necessarily think about or worry about that's going to come, in the immediate future. Right, what's around the corner? Oh, sorry, I've lost it. Renters Reform Bill. So this is the one that I guess many of you are sat here tonight thinking, have read about, heard about. You've probably only heard about 2 or 3 bits of it, which is we're going to ban Section 21. We can't get people out. Oh my God, what's going to happen? And it's the thing that ultimately was announced in May 2000, earlier part of this year in 23. So there's quite a lot to this, and there's a lot of parts of it, and we just haven't got the time to even sort of touch on all of it. But obviously we're going to pick out the key areas, and probably the key areas that you need to be aware of. So it's Renters Reform Bill. It was Tenant Reform Bill. They've now called it Renters Reform Bill. The first thing I've put on there is don't panic. Basically, I say don't panic is because this was talked about in 2019. The bill was announced in May 2023. It's currently going through its first reading in Parliament. Hasn't finished its first reading. It's then got to go through its second reading. It's then got to go through the committee stage. It's then got to go through the third reading. It's then got to get royal assent, and then when it's got royal assent, they'll give you a date of when it's going to be implemented. And the best guess, and it is a guess, and bearing in mind that what have we got next year, probably? An election, that this isn't going to come in for 18 months to 2 years minimum. So nothing that's here is going to happen now. But it's obviously something that we need to be mindful of and we need to be thinking about. When it does come in, the implementation date, they've already said that there's going to be a 6-month notice period for all new tenancies, and then there's probably going to be an 18-month period after that for existing tenancies. So if you're in an existing fixed-term tenancy, you've probably got 3 years, could even be 4 years, before a lot of this will impact on you. So that's why I say don't panic. There's a long time scale, there's a lot of time to think about how it's going to affect us. And the other thing is, there will be changes. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of lobbying going on. You've still got time to lobby your MP, and I would suggest you do that. Lobby your MP, there's still a lot of talking that's going to be done in government. And like I said, that's why it's quite difficult for a presentation like this to be 100% accurate, because a lot of these things will change, and the definitions will change, and the detail will change. So we're just sort of focusing on the headlines, but don't write it all down as gospel and come back to me in 3 years' time and say, you said this was going to happen, because undoubtedly some bits of it will change. So abolishing the Section 21 no-fault eviction notice. This is the headline grabber. This is the one that everybody goes, oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm going to let my property out, I'm going to put a tenant in, I can't get them out. Fortunately, that isn't going to happen. But basically, there's no question the Section 21 notice is going to go. Assured short-hold tenancies are going to go. You will have an assured periodic tenancy, and the Section 21 notice, which they refer to often as the no-fault eviction notice. That's a phrase I hate, because there's usually always a reason why you're serving that notice. But the way and the format of that will go. So there's no point in talking about it. When it happens, there will not be the Section 21 process to get a tenant out. There will be obviously a revision of the Section 8 grounds for possession. We'll come on to that in a minute, but basically you will go from Section 21, which is often used, but a Section 21 notice currently is used in about 30 or 40% of possessions. The rest is done by Section 8 notice. So it's not like the Section 8 is something new, it's what the majority of tenancies are used in order to get possession. The other key thing is the ending of the fixed term. So at the moment, a lot of you will do a fixed term agreement initially, 6 months, 12 months, an agreement basically up to 3 years under an AST. They'll go. There will be no fixed term. They will just immediately become a periodic assured tenancy. So in effect, a monthly tenancy. So same sort of agreement. It will be an assured tenancy. The assured tenancy is what we all used pre-1988. I remember them, some of you won't. And then it turned into the assured short-hold tenancy through the Housing Act 88, and then revised again in 96. But we're sort of going back to that, an assured tenancy, and it will be monthly periodic. And that will be the start of the tenancy. That's what you'll draw up. Same sort of terms, it'll probably be the same sort of look, it'll be the same sort of agreement. It just won't have a short-hold tenancy at the top, it will have an assured, and it will be monthly. So then, so there'll be an assured periodic, that's what it will be called. The new legislation will just apply to an assured tenancy under the Housing Act. So there are some exemptions to that. The main one is a company let, a license to occupy, a short-term license to occupy, or a letting to a company, and they'll be excluded from it because they aren't an assured tenancy. But anything that is an assured tenancy, will effectively, come under this new legislation. So that throws up lots of sort of conundrums as to what does that mean. Basically, a tenant will be able to give 2 months' notice in order to terminate that agreement, and they can effectively give 2 months' notice to terminate it at any time. The reason, again, I say don't panic about that is that most people in this room let property. They probably let good property. They let good property to good tenants. And there's suddenly not going to be a change because this legislation comes in. Most people will want to continue to rent a property. they want to continue to rent a good property, and they'll continue to pay you a reasonable rent, and they'll continue to go at the end. Again, a statistic that the government don't often say is that the majority of all tenancies are ended by the tenant, not the landlord. 70 to 80% of all tenancies are ended by the tenant, whereas they will focus on the landlord, as the sort of perception is it's the landlords. They're the ones that are kicking all the tenants out. It's not. The reality is most landlords want to keep a tenant in a property, and they're not looking to get rid of a tenant. Reform of the Section 8 grounds for possession. So this is now going to be the way that you can get possession. And they have added a lot more grounds to this, and therefore they've added grounds that are key, in other words, to sort of replace the main reasons that you as a landlord would want to get possession of your property. So they've bolstered up the Section 8 process. I think there are 33 grounds under Section 8. I've got them here. I've got a long list. I'm not going to read them all, but most of you will be familiar with Section 8 as often the way that you got possession of a property through rent arrears. But there's lots of grounds under a Section 8, and again they've added some grounds in order to sort of replace some of the main reasons that you as a landlord might want to get possession. The key one is occupation by a family member. You'll see mandatory. So under Section 8 there's mandatory grounds. They're the ones that the court will have to give possession for. As long as the grounds are met, there's no sort of discretion, they have to give it, and then there are discretionary grounds. A lot of the Section 8s are mandatory. So, you as a landlord want to move back into your property, or you want to occupy it by a family member, you will be able to get possession back under Section 8. The family member group has broadened, so it's not just you or your spouse or your partner, it can be your children, it can be your grandparents, in-laws, I think so. There's a wider group of people that qualify to meet that family member qualification. The other thing is you don't have to have been living in the property before, and that's a key change. So it's not a case as it was your home, and you have to prove that it was your home in order to say you want to go back and live in it. So it could be a buy-to-let investment, it could be one you've never lived in, but as long as you can show that you want a family member or you want to live in it, then you'll be able to get possession. It's probably unlikely you'll be able to do that for the first 6 months of the tenancy. And again, you'll have to give 2 months' notice, and you will not be able to re-let the property for 3 months after you serve the notice date. So they're obviously trying to sort of stop people using that just purely to get the tenant out and then immediately turn around and re-let it. So it's going to be a 3-month window in which you wouldn't be able to do that. Intention to sell, that's another mandatory one. So the key word here is intention. All you've got to show is an intention to sell that property. And a lot of these definitions will come out in the wash. So what have you got to do to show that you intend to sell a property? At the moment we don't really know, but it's a key word. So all you've got to do is you want your property back and you say you want to sell it. And you'll be able, it's a mandatory condition, and again, you won't be able to serve that in the first 6 months of the tenancy. You won't be able to turn around and let it again for 3 months. But again, as long as you can say that you want to sell it, you'll be able to get possession. Sale by mortgagee, mandatory. That's in a current agreement. You'll see it in most agreements that they have the ability to sell the property. The change there is that it can not only apply to a mortgage that was in place at the start of the tenancy, which is the current case, it will also apply to a mortgage that you might have taken up during the tenancy. So if you're taking up a buy-to-let mortgage or taking up a mortgage, it would apply to that as well. They've bolstered 14 antisocial behaviour. That's a sort of discretionary ground, but they've just sort of made that slightly clearer. It's arguable. But in effect, through antisocial behaviour, it will be a little bit easier to serve a Section 8 and get your possession back. That is a discretionary one, not a mandatory one. So that will be open to the court to sort of decide. Rent reviews, Section 13 notice. So at the moment, if you want to review the rent of your property, you can do it in one of 3 ways. You have a fixed term tenancy, the fixed term comes to an end, you negotiate with the tenant. If the tenant doesn't like it, well, you can either say go tenant, but effectively that's when often rents are reviewed. You can have a rent review clause in your tenancy agreement that says at the end of 12 months, the rent's going to go up by 5% or RPI or whatever it is. Or you negotiate a rent review, or you serve a Section 13 notice. They're in place now. So all that will sort of change, and all you'll be left with is a Section 13 notice. So that's the only way you're going to be able to review a rent. You've got to serve onto your tenant a Section 13 notice. We hope they will review the Section 13 notice, because it's quite a complicated form, and it's a form that often isn't completed properly and does fall down at the tribunal. So hopefully as part of this they will review that and make it a simpler form. But so in effect you now will need to give 2 months notice, whereas at the moment you have to give a month's notice to your tenant. You will have to give 2 months notice. You will only be able to review the rent every 12 months. That's what most people do. There is no rent cap, there's no maximum amount that you can put the rent up to other than market rent. So you will have to do market rent. A tenant still has the ability to go to the rent tribunal to have it heard if they're not happy with it, and then they will adjudicate on the rent. So the process is very similar. The Section 13 process is similar, but that is really the only way that you're going to be able to review the rent, and you will have to record it through the Section 13 process. I think that's what they're going to say. So probably just agreeing the rent, you will have to be seen to be doing the formal process of completing the form, sending it to the tenant, tenant agreeing, so that there's a record of it. Tenant's right to request a pet. Oh, no. I hear you all saying. So this is again the headline grabber, Section 21, that's going, and the other one is, oh, all my tenants are suddenly going to want a pet. So it effectively has come in to say that the tenant will have the right to request a pet. Now in doing so, they've got to give you as a landlord 42 days notice in writing. You can then ask for more information, which can therefore make 42 days into, we're not sure, but probably another 7 or 14 days. And effectively, you cannot unreasonably withhold permission. Now, the problem is no one really knows what that definition of unreasonable is. The only thing that they really quote when you look at anything at the moment is to say, well, where your head lease says you cannot have pets in this property, then that's a good reason to say, tenant, you cannot have a pet in the property. There will undoubtedly be other reasonable reasons why a tenant or a pet is not suited to that property. So obviously someone who requests 3 dogs into a 1-bedroom flat, that is not reasonable and it would be refused. But it is going to be easier for a tenant to have an appropriate pet in an appropriate property. I don't think that's going to probably change. I mean, I think it will be. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to accept a tenant with pets at the start of the tenancy. And this again is something I wanted to sort of mention. You as a landlord still have the choice to choose the tenant you want. So if you've got a choice of tenants, that's the key thing. You've got to have a choice of tenants, and you've got 2 with pets, 2 with children, 1 without pets, or 1 without pets or children. You can still choose that person. You haven't got to justify it, you haven't got to give a reason, you've still got landlord choice. Obviously what this applies to is when you've got the tenant in, then they can effectively turn around and say, okay, I want to consider having a pet. So it is something that's going to come in. I mean, for many, we'll come on to stats actually. Did we mention the pet one, Claire? No, we haven't. So over recent years, because of the significant tenant choice, the amount of tenants that have or the amount of properties that are being let to tenants with pets has declined because landlords have had the choice to choose with a pet or without a pet. So I can see that changing. I think it will come in. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge, and there's a lot of water and a lot of bridges because the definition of that will have to be defined. And there will be a number of reasons why you, as a landlord, can reasonably withhold that. If you're allergic to pets yourself, it's a property you lived in yourself, and you're allergic to cats, well, is that going to be a reasonable reason for you to refuse your tenant having a cat? Probably. But how that's going to happen, we're not sure yet. And this is what's going to come out over the next year, 2 years, as it passes through Parliament. What you can do is insist upon the tenant to have a pet insurance. So they're going to change the tenant's fee bill, whereas in effect tenant fees were banned. and they're going to allow that you can insist upon a tenant, if they want a pet, that they must take out pet insurance. You can either take it out and charge the tenant, or you can ask the tenant, shows you proof that they've taken out tenant insurance. So that's something that will add a little bit of protection. It's something you can insist upon, and maybe when the tenant is going through this whole process and has to take out pet insurance, that their desire to have that pet may not be quite as great as it was at the start. But it is an area that we've got to find out a lot more about, really, to understand how it's going to be, how it will affect everything. Private rented sector ombudsman. So this is something that they say that every landlord will have to sign up to. So we sign up to an ombudsman. We've got them. So when somebody's not very happy about us, then people have the ability to go to an ombudsman. And the same will apply to you as a landlord. You will have to sign up to a landlord's ombudsman. Who they are, what they are, where they'll be, we don't know. And that will give the ability for the tenant to complain, if there's a reason for them to complain, and then they will look at it and sort of adjudicate on it. What the detail of that is, we don't really know, but it's something that's coming in. Private rental portal, this is the other thing that they're saying will come in. In effect, you will have to register yourself as a landlord and all your let properties. Every property will have a reference number. So in effect, they're going to create a database of all landlords and all let property. Some of you might not want that, but that's what's going to come in. You'll have a unique reference number, and often when you're trying to do something else, you will be required to provide that unique reference number. So I'm sort of thinking court action or court possession or whatever it might be. I'd imagine you'll say, well, what's your unique reference number for this property? But again, we're not entirely 100% sure. The missing elements. So it was announced, and we sort of thought that other elements of the Renters Reform Bill would come in. These are the bits that haven't come in. Introduce a decent home standard. It's sort of what applies to social housing. I mean, again, I don't see this as a major thing. I mean, we're all sort of, we're all looking to improve our properties, make sure they're up to a lettable standard. We're all sort of governed by the local authorities and housing health and safety rating system. So we're all sort of there anyway, but there's probably going to be a sort of decent home standard by which, all properties will need to meet. That hasn't come in. When it will, we don't know. Outlaw blanket bans, they thought that was going to come in. You could say, you wouldn't be able to say no children, or you could not let to benefits, people on benefits. But that hasn't come in, so effectively when you come to market a property, you can market it to no children, and you can market it to people to say no if you're on benefits. No rent cap, that was the other thing, widely quoted, that there might be a mechanism to have a maximum or maximum rent for a property, or a maximum amount that you can increase the rent every year. So that hasn't come in. They haven't sort of done very much to improve local authority enforcement. That's often the problem. Well, depends which way you look at it. But most of this is all enforced by the local authority. And with stretched resources and lack of people and lack of finance, they effectively just cannot do it. They cannot enforce most of the extra work that they will be asked to do. So you would imagine that they will need to invest in local authority enforcement or provide an ability for them to do it. Otherwise, it's just impossible for them to be able to sort of consider even trying to think they can enforce most of this. The other key thing is the radical reform of the court process. So I think scrapping Section 21, okay, fine, that's gone, or will be going. Replacing it with Section 8. We all sort of know what the court process is like. It's sort of broken. Dependent where you are in the country and what your local court is, if you want to get possession of a property, it's 12 weeks minimum, probably. In some areas it's 16 weeks. Okay, there are some areas where it's quicker. By taking away the Section 21 notice, which is roughly 30 to 40% of all possessions, that's going to lump more onto the Section 8 process, which has to go through the court. So that's going to add more cases being heard by the local court, and unless they invest in the court process to make that streamlined and quicker, then it's just all going to go into a massive logjam. Again, I think that's something that will come out in the next 2 to 3 years, because the realisation is that they can't say we're going to do all this and not be able to, provide the tools in order to be able to sort of facilitate it. But that's the sort of key area that is, again, something that will, I'm sure, come through in the next sort of year or two. Is that me done? Is it? Amanda, sorry. It's over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can I firstly say thank you to Claire and Andrew for inviting me along this evening. We're just going to bear with our technical glitch. I think my IT manager is sorting out. So tonight I'm actually going to run through some of the tax implications of running a rental property business. So what I thought we'd start with is to say, what is a rental business? So it is the letting of residential or commercial property, and it's no matter where it is situated in the world. So it doesn't have to be here in the UK, it could be somewhere in New Zealand. It doesn't need to be a residential property, it could be a commercial property. So we are looking at all areas of rental. Now it can be run by you as individuals, or it could be run by more than one individual together, so you own a property jointly, or it might be owned and run by a company. So here in the UK, HMRC have decided that we should have 4 categories of rental activity. So those 4 categories are, we've got a UK rental business, an overseas rental business, a UK furnished holiday let business, and an overseas furnished holiday let business. Now, where you own more than one property in any one of those above categories, those properties are treated as one business. So the income and expenses are amalgamated within that. So I've mentioned the words rental business versus furnished holiday let. So what's the difference? Now we're going to look at this slightly backwards. So a rental business is everything that doesn't fulfill the furnished holiday let criteria. So what exactly is the furnished holiday let criteria? Now anyone who's got a furnished holiday let will immediately think about day counts, but I thought we'd start at the beginning. So a furnished holiday let is something that's situated in the UK or the EEA. It's got to be furnished sufficient for normal occupation. So what exactly is normal occupation? It means that you and I should be able to walk into that property and pretty much live in it straight away. So there will be a bed, there will be crockery, it will be fully furnished and usable. It's got to be let on a commercial basis. Now this one, everyone probably thinks, well, of course they're let on a commercial basis, but HMRC don't always agree. So you've got to intend to make a profit from it, and you've got to be able to show that it's being let on a commercial basis. Now this is where we get to the day count that a lot of people who've got furnished holiday lets will know about. The accommodation has got to be available to be let as furnished holiday accommodation for 210 days in the tax year. On top of that, it's got to be actually let for 105 days in the tax year. Now within that 105 days, if you've got any lettings that are more than 31 days, all right, then they won't count. Now you'll see I have put up that there is a bit of an exception there. So if you had someone who was staying in your furnished holiday let for less than 31 days, but say they became ill and they needed to stay for an extended period, that period of time will still qualify to your 105 days. Now this 31 day count there is in there because what you can do is have a longer term winter let. All right, but that longer term winter let doesn't count towards your 105 day of furnished holiday letting days. Now with that criteria, there's also a couple of extensions to it. So there's a couple of elections that you might be able to claim in order to qualify. So say for example you didn't qualify in 1 year, but you've got more than one property. You'll remember that I mentioned with our categories, if you have more than one property within a category, you can amalgamate them. So we have an averaging election. If you had a furnished holiday let that say you let for 200 days, but you had another one that you only let for 90, the one that was let for 90 wouldn't normally qualify. But under the averaging election, what you can do is you can actually add those two periods together, divide by 2 in this case, because there's 2 properties, and you will then see that both would be over 105. Now the averaging election you can use in how many years as you need to use it. There's no restriction on time frame. The other election you can use is something called a period of grace election. Now this came in handy when we had COVID, because during COVID, obviously people's furnished holiday lets for a period of time were not going to reach those letting period days. But where your furnished holiday let qualified in the previous tax year, and you can show that you tried to achieve the day count, you can make a period of grace election so that your furnished holiday let continues to qualify as a furnished holiday let. Now, as you can see from the slide, there is a time frame on that one. So you can only make that election for 2 consecutive tax years. So why do we have different categories? Now I've got to say, part of me says that we have different categories because HMRC like to make our life difficult. But that's not entirely why we have different categories. Now, there are slightly different rules in relation to offsets of losses against profits, as well as how we actually calculate our profit or loss, and also what reliefs are available, depending on what category we are looking at. So again, it's because HMRC like to make our life difficult. So I thought it was worth running through an example. Now I am hoping that you will be able to see this. Now I'm stood here thinking I can only just read the slide, so I'm hoping you can all see it. What I've got up on the screen is our 4 different categories. So at the top, I've got our UK rental property business, then our overseas, then I've got our UK FHL, and then our overseas FHL. And what you'll see on each one, I've got 2 properties. And I mentioned earlier on, where you've got 2 properties or more within any one category, you can amalgamate them. So taking the top one, we have property 1, and that's got a profit of £10,000. Property number 2 has a loss of £5,000, and therefore in my UK rental business, I have a taxable amount of £5,000. Now I've got the same for my UK rental business, my overseas rental business, and my overseas furnished holiday let. But what hopefully you can see is that my UK furnished holiday let, property 1's made a profit of £2,000, and property 2 has made a loss of £7,000. Now, hopefully, maths-wise, that makes a loss of £5,000. At the bottom of the slide, I've put in total taxable profit for the year. Now, what would your immediate reaction be as to what you think your total rental property profit is going to be there? 10,000? 10,000? Missing a slide. Missing a slide. Apologies, we are missing a slide. So I'm just going to walk over and explain it to you. With this UK furnished holiday let loss, we cannot offset that loss against any other category. So the reason we have different categories is that losses on one category cannot be offset against another category. So in this example, our total taxable profits for the year would be 15,000, not 10,000. Technical glitch. Here we go. So what happens to our UK furnished holiday let loss? Have we lost it forever? No. That UK furnished holiday let loss is carried forward and will be available for offset against our future UK furnished holiday let profit. Okay, so the timing of the relief for that loss is slightly different to what we'd expect. Oh, sorry, apologies, my slide just went in a different order. That's how good I am at IT. So, one of the other things I mentioned earlier on is the method of calculating our profits and losses is slightly different depending on our categories. Now, our standard calculation for a rental business, to calculate our profits, we are going to have our gross rental income, we are going to take off our direct rental expenses to give us our taxable rental profit for the year. Okay? Now, for our UK and overseas residential rental businesses, the rules are pretty much the same. But for furnished holiday lets, there is a slight difference in relation to something called capital allowances. So for furnished holiday lets, and also for commercial lets, we can claim something called capital allowances in relation to the acquisition of what we call plant, machinery, fixtures and fittings. So to give you an example, with our furnished holiday let, you've gone and bought a furnished holiday let and you're just equipping it for the first time. You're going to be buying a bed, a wardrobe, a washing machine. With capital allowances, you can claim those costs against your rental profit. For a residential let, you've just gone and bought your residential property. Now you're going to have it as furnished, but it's not going to be a furnished holiday let. When you first purchase your bed, your wardrobe and your washing machine, you don't get to claim those costs against your rental income. Now on a residential, when you come to renew those items, so the next time you buy your bed, your washing machine and your wardrobe, they will be a renewal and you will then be able to claim the renewal against your rental property. All right? So that's one of the big differences between furnished holiday lets and also commercial lets against your residential let. So what are the other differences? Now, these are all quite small differences, but they can make a big difference. So capital gains tax. So as you can see, furnished holiday lets are treated as business assets, and that is solely for CGT purposes. What does that mean? So a furnished holiday let may qualify for something called business asset disposal relief, okay? Whereas a sale of a residential property wouldn't. If you qualify for business asset disposal relief, then your capital gain would be taxed at 10%. Now that's in comparison to the sale of a residential property being taxed at 18% or 28%, depending on whether you're a higher rate taxpayer or if the gain falls into your basic rate. Now, even if you don't qualify for business asset disposal relief, the CGT rate on the sale of a furnished holiday let is based on the business asset. So it would be at 10% or 20% where it falls into the higher rate band in comparison to 18% and 28%. Inheritance tax. Now this is one of those subjects that's quite complex. If you have got a furnished holiday let, now I put may in capitals there because it may qualify for something called business property relief. HMRC do not like claims for business property relief in relation to a furnished holiday let. However, if you are running your furnished holiday let as a trading business and you can show that you are really doing a lot with it, it may qualify for relief under inheritance tax rules. It's very hard to get that though. So in all of this, one word I've been using is rental expenses. So what are rental expenses? So in order honour a stags being there, we put letting agent fees. So our letting agent's fees are an allowable deduction against your rental income. Yes. In honour of us, accountancy. And then insurance, repairs and renewals. Now, repairs and renewals are going to be one of those costs that may be a little bit sporadic. In 1 year, you might have quite low repairs and renewals, but there may be times where you think, actually, something needs a good refit. A lot of the questions we get asked in relation to repairs and renewals is where you are going in and maybe, for example, refitting a kitchen. Is that an allowable deduction against your rental income, or is it capital? Now, the rules are complicated, but to give you an idea, if you are replacing something on a like-for-like basis, it will be a renewal and can be offset against your rental income. To give you an example, with the kitchen, if you had a kitchen that had 10 units in it before, you strip those 10 units out and replace them with 10 units. You haven't changed the design of the kitchen, you haven't increased the number of units. That's a renewal. Same thing goes with things like boilers. Now, these can be quite substantial costs when you actually come to do these items, and it's important to know the difference between a renewal, where you can get tax relief against your rental income as the cost arises, or an enhancement. In very rough terms, an enhancement would be where you are doing something to change it. So in my kitchen example, if I had put in a breakfast bar and that was new, or I'd added a couple more units, then that's an enhancement. All right. So your general utilities, ground rents and service charges, and for furnished holiday lets, you'll see quite a lot of this. So your consumables, your cleaning, your general welcome packs, those sort of things will be quite a significant cost for you. And I've added one thing that people ask a lot about, and that's travel and subsistence. So where you do travel solely to go and visit your rental property, you can put in a claim for travel. Now, you could apportion out all of your motor vehicle running costs in comparison to your total mileage over your rental business mileage. That's fairly cumbersome. So what we often say is that you would use the HMRC approved mileage rates of 40p per mile. Now, one thing to mention on travel and subsistence, it is a difficult one to calculate, and it's also difficult to substantiate. Your travel needs to be mainly for the purpose of visiting that rental business. So if you are popping into your rental property on the way to see your children, grandchildren, parents, or going shopping, then your main purpose is personal and not to go and see your rental business. So then you wouldn't be able to make that travel and subsistence claim. And I've also added use of home as office at the bottom, because again, this is something we get asked about quite a lot. It's a contentious area with HMRC. Technically, use of home as office, what you should do is work out the area that you use in your house, the amount of time you actually use it for, and then apportion all of your expenses. And HMRC's guidance, where you are supposed to do this technically, would be that you should meter your water for your use at home. All right. That's fairly complicated. So what we often find is that we use the HMRC simplified expenses. Now, the simplified expenses are, however, for the self-employed rather than a rental business. But at the moment, HMRC hasn't queried this. They've not raised any issues with it, but it is something to be wary of. Now, the amounts involved are small, all right, which is why I think HMRC haven't argued about it. And you will see at the bottom that that list is not exhaustive, okay? Anything that relates to your rental property, so a direct rental expense, could be included on that list. So, what's missing? Now, for a number of you, you might have been reading through that and think, there's something quite big missing from that list. Finance costs. Now, with the market as it is at the moment, finance costs are increasing in their significance. So our mortgage rates are going up, refinancing costs are a lot more expensive than they used to be. So what's included in finance costs? This is going to be our interest on mortgages or loans to acquire those properties, our costs of refinancing, so our remortgages, and there's a small one on there that if you do have a bank account that is solely used for your rental activity, then bank charges would also be included in your finance costs. So why didn't I put finance costs on the rental expense page? It's because they are treated slightly differently now. So from April 2017, the treatment of residential finance costs changed, and they are now treated as a tax reducer rather than a rental expense. Now, to explain that, I thought we'd run through some examples. So I'm hoping that you will be able to see this. Now, just to point out for you, I've got 3 columns. This one is for individuals with furnished holiday lets or commercial properties. This one is for individuals with residential properties. And the last column is for companies, and that's for all properties, all right, for companies. So looking at the numbers, we've gone for gross rental income of £10,000 across the board, keeping the numbers nice and simple. We've then put in our rental expenses of £5,000, and then on our next line I've got finance costs. But what you'll see is that on finance costs I have got £2,000 on the individuals with furnished holiday lets and commercial properties, but I've got nothing in the individuals with residential properties. And then again for companies, I've got £2,000 in there. So that's giving us taxable profits of £3,000 for individuals with furnished holiday lets and commercial properties, and £3,000 for companies. But for individuals with residential properties, we've got a taxable profit of £5,000. Now, to run through the tax implications, I've had to make an assumption. So we're assuming that this is going to be taxed at the higher rate. So it's going to be taxed at 40%. So for those individuals with furnished holiday lets and commercial properties, our tax charge is £1,200. But you'll notice on the next line, I've got something that says tax reducer. So for residential finance costs, we've got £2,000 there at tax relief of 20%. So we have our tax reducer. Now in this example, with our individual residential properties, our tax charge is £1,600, and that's because we're only getting relief for our finance costs at 20%. Right, to take that one step forward, where your rental is being taxed at the basic rate, so if you are a basic rate taxpayer, then as you can see from the bottom of this slide, it doesn't matter whether you have got furnished holiday lets or commercial properties, or if you've got residential properties. The only time that tax reducer makes a difference is if you are a higher rate taxpayer or an additional rate taxpayer. And to finish the example, corporation tax. So for anyone who's running their business through a company, you will pay corporation tax on your rental profits. And you will see that the minimum rate of corporation tax is 19% and the maximum rate is 25%. So we've now got 2 rates of corporation tax. So the minimum applies if your company's profits are less than 50,000. The maximum applies if your company's profits are over 250,000, and you'll have a rate in between 19 and 25% where the company's profits are in between those 2 levels. So I know we're running a bit short on time, so I'm going to get through these last few slides as quickly as I can. But just a few other points to note. We get asked questions quite a lot about rental businesses, and one of the things I do get asked is about VAT. So I thought I was just going to run through very quickly a few VAT points. Now I've put up there a non-furnished holiday let rental, and that's a rental of a residential property or a commercial property, if it's not a furnished holiday let, is an exempt supply. If you've got an exempt supply and that's your only supplies, you cannot register for VAT. If you have got taxable supplies as well as an exempt supply, you can register for VAT. All right. A commercial property, you can do something called opt to tax it. So if you wanted, you could put an option to tax in place so that your rental income is then standard rated, so you charge output VAT on it. Residential properties cannot have an option to tax. And the fly in the ointment for furnished holiday lets is they are automatically a standard rated taxable supply. Now, if your only standard rated taxable supply is your furnished holiday let income, As long as it's below the registration threshold of 85,000, then you don't need to register for VAT. And then capital gains tax. Now the differences between the properties and individuals and companies is quite important. On here we've got, if you sell a residential property, the gain on the disposal and the tax needs to be dealt with within 60 days of the date of sale. Now this has been in for a number of years now, but still a lot of people don't know about it. So to say that again, if you sell a residential property, you need to report that gain and pay over the tax within 60 days of the date of sale. Okay? And your tax rate on a residential sale is going to be at 18% where any part of the gain falls into your basic rate band, 28% on anything falling above your basic rate band. For commercial property, if you sell a commercial property, then you need to report the gain on your self-assessment tax return, and that return needs to be submitted by the 31st of January, following the end of the tax year in which the disposal is made. The tax needs to be paid on that same day, and the tax rates for commercial property, 10% where the gain falls into your basic rate, 20% where it falls above the basic rate. Furnished holiday lets, I mentioned this before. Your tax rate is at 10% and 20%, and like commercial properties, you need to report it under the same time frame. So by 31st of January, following the end of the tax year of disposal, and the tax needs to be paid at the same time. For companies, where you make a gain on the sale of a property in a company, you will pay corporation tax on that gain. Okay? The corporation tax, as we mentioned before, 19% and 25%, and the tax is payable 9 months after the end of the accounting period in which the property is sold. And I'm going to finish on one more thing. I get asked this all the time. Should I incorporate? So should I run my rental business on my own with someone else, or should I run it through a company? So should you incorporate? There is no yes or no answer to that question. You have to look at it on an individual basis, and you have to run through all of the specifics. Now, I know a lot of people would like to say, I just want a yes or no answer. There is no yes or no answer. You have to look at it from your own specific circumstances and consider whether it does work for you or whether it doesn't. There's quite a lot to take account of. So I'm afraid I can't give you a yes or no on the last question. Now, on that, I am going to pass back to Claire. Thank you very much.
I'll be quick, everyone. I know you're all keen to get up and stretch your legs. So we're in Taunton, so I thought, although I'm sure lots of you are all interested in the whole of the West Country, I thought I'd just focus on talking about Taunton and the surrounding area. So I know hopefully you can see, but obviously investing in property, you want your return from your rental yield, but you also want a capital return as well. So I just thought it was interesting, again, sort of touching back on what I was talking about when we spoke about rents, but we analyse our portfolio and we're continually managing rents, so helping landlords to put up or adjust the rents accordingly to the market. So actually at the moment, in the last 12 months, we've increased from 861 to 979. So our Taunton managed portfolio has increased 13.7% over that period. I've also looked at house sales, so you're obviously also interested in what the capital value of your asset is as well. So over the last 3 years, so looking at Taunton, so this first image that we've got here, it's increased in the last 3 years by 17 to 24%. Over a 10-year period, between 48 and 65%. So that's giving you, over that long term, still your capital growth. Even with uncertainty in the market at the moment, we have the peaks and troughs. Over that medium to long term, it is still giving a good return. The property market is still a choice for people to invest in. Talk about buy-to-let and investing in property. It still gives you a good return, like I say, over that medium to long term investment. Provides a tangible asset. People like property. You can drive by it. You can go and have a look at it. You can see it. Unlike when it's in the bank or in investments, you can actually drive there, have a look at it and check it's still there. It's available in your area. Lots of landlords buy within the area that they live in. If you have property, think about where it is, 15 to 20 mile radius usually of where you live. So again, you can see it, you can access it, you can look after it. It's easy to understand. You know property, you know how to look after it. You might need a bit of help with actually letting it in the legislation bit, which is where we can help you, but looking after the property itself, you're able to do it. It provides, as I say, an income as well as the capital gain, capital yield. And whilst, although it may not be as tax efficient, it still gives you a good return. As with everything, investment, there is a risk and you do have to manage it. So you have got to be looking after it, thinking about it and making sure you're taking care of it. Just got some examples here, so very last few slides, just to give you an idea as to what has happened with property that we have let and have let for a number of years. So here we've got a 3-bedroom property in Taunton, town centre location, let in 2019 at £795 per calendar month. We've let it this year at £1,100. So that's increased 38.3% rental value in the 4 years. Obviously the capital value has increased as well. At the moment we're looking at 275 approximate sale value of that property, so we're getting a 4.8% yield. Another one here in Wellington, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom property. It's modern, accessible to the M5. We let this one in December 2020 at £950 per calendar month. Let earlier this year at £1,500. So again, 57.8% increase in the 3 years. Value at 415 approximate at the moment. Again, 4.3% yield. Back to Taunton again, an apartment in the town centre there. Let in 2020, so just 3 years ago, at £660 per calendar month. Let earlier this year at £1,000. So 66.6% increase over that 3 years. And again, with the value at 150,000, we're looking at an 8% rental yield. And last one, something a little bit different to finish on. Milverton, so maybe a bit more of a village location. Let this one actually, we've been looking after it for a long time, so August 2014 at £675 per calendar month. We're still letting it now in September 2023, 1,150. That's actually a 70% increase in those 9 years. Again, based on its current value, you're looking at a yield of 5.3%. So regardless if we go up and down over the medium to long term, which is what most people are looking at an investment for, it's still giving you a return, both rental yield and the capital growth in the value. And I promise that's it.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Claire. So I know there's lots to take in, and I knew we'd run over. And I know you're here to get a bit of food and a drink at the end, so I know we'll try and get through this a little bit very quickly. Before I do that, I mean, we've got a bit of time for a few questions and answers, but not a lot of time. Like I said, we can deal with questions and particular scenarios. Come and see us. We've got teams from our Taunton office, Honiton office, all here at the back who are willing to help and have a chat with you. I'm sure there's people from Moles here dotted around. So again, from a more of a tax point of view, come and talk to us afterwards. Would at this point like to thank the NFU and Environment for attending and being patient at the back. So have a chat with them when you're eating your bit of food. We had the competition, and if we can, has anyone not taken part in the competition? Do you want to take part? You do? Well, if you've got 5 minutes while we're doing questions and answers to go and fill your format and give it to the back, and then we'll draw that as quickly as we can. So, has anyone got a question? Oh, no, that was quick. Yes?
This is for Amanda.
Excellent.
You were talking about VAT chargeable on holiday lets.
Yep.
And property being accumulated. So if you have several holiday lets, you will then have to charge VAT on the income?
Yeah, you do. So from a VAT perspective, so just to say that question again, if that's all right, we were talking about amalgamating our FHLs within that FHL category and whether it would be VAT on all of the FHLs. Short answer, yes. Okay, so what you do for a VAT perspective is you look at who's registered. So if you're the individual that's registered for VAT, any properties that you own that are within that registration and are used for furnished holiday let purposes will be subject to VAT. Is that all right?
So if you, I'm just changing that.
That's right.
If you had a business, would you then have 2 or 3 businesses that are independent and therefore not, that would be exempt, or would you then say, oh no, these are different people owning them, and you have to change ownership, or?
It's the ownership that you're looking at there. So what we're looking at is whether you would be able to separate out those furnished holiday lets so that they don't fall within the VAT registration. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. It comes down to ownership. So if you are the owner of say 3 furnished holiday lets, they would be within your VAT registration. If you owned 1 property with me and 2 properties on your own, the one that you held with me, that is separate, all right, because you've got 2 owners on it. Is that right?
I'm taking that as 2 questions. Anybody else? Next door.
So with the abolishing of the short-term tenancies, short tenancies, what do you think is going to happen with student lets?
I was hoping no one was going to answer me that. It's obviously a big point, because I mean, most people that let student property, or you're a student, you want some certainty. So I mean, usually, you know, an 8-month fixed term will take you through that sort of period or term period. So as it stands at the moment, and I think this is one key area that will probably be reviewed, because obviously they've got to strike the balance between not restricting that market and making properties available. So this legislation doesn't apply to you know, university accommodation. It is only private student accommodation. So, you know, university block accommodation it doesn't apply to. So there is an argument to say that private landlords who let to students might well look at letting their property via the university to be incorporated under that umbrella, which may mean that they can still do a fixed term tenancy. It's an area that's going to be reviewed. I mean, to be honest, we don't do student lets. It's an area that we don't get involved with. I think it's an area that you either do or you don't do. But yes, I mean, at the moment as it stands, it will be the same. So they're going to have to come up with a mechanism to be able to sort of allow a student-let accommodation to continue. Not sure, really, is the answer.
Excuse me, when it comes to student lets, different local authorities have different criteria. In some areas it's like down here it's not too bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of this, you know, how it's interpreted, how the local authority will enforce or how they interpret will be open, you know, to speculation. And I think a lot of the detail, a lot of the meat that's got to go on the bone between now and actually when it's implemented, because at the moment there's so many grey areas, and that's one of them. Yes?
This isn't really a question, but as you're all landlords, I presume you're all landlords, the local authority here in Taunton Dean have changed their legislation, and now instead of having a 3-month void period, you know, a freebie, so us landlords can, on the council tax, so that us landlords can get in there, repaint, get new carpets and everything, and we don't have to pay any for 3 months. That changed as of this year, and there is no void empty period at all, so that now we're trying to get our properties up to really good quality to give our tenants that fantastic service, but now we cannot have any of that free period, and I don't know if everybody else is aware of this time. It is new. Maybe we should en masse go and canvass our local MP and say, this, you're wanting us to keep standards great, but you're giving us no bonus time.
Thank you. No, I mean, again, it's you know, again, it highlights the variation between local authorities, and you know what affects one area particularly may not affect another. But again, I think it highlights also we've got to lobby on so many areas, and at the end of the day, the government sort of want to improve the standard of rented accommodation. You know, they want to balance between the rights of the landlord and the tenant, but you know, actually, they're often using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And they get it wrong on so many fronts. So I think, you know, there's so many areas that I think we've just got to, you know, we all sort of sit back and take it on the chin a bit, really. But I think we've really got to get out there and really lobby, and we've got a period now where we can do that. because we need to try and influence areas of this to try and rebalance. I can smell the food, and so can everyone else. I mean, one more question, and then we'll finish there, and then we'll probably do the draw if we can, and then you're all free to go and wander around. So, any more questions? Good, that's excellent. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many. It makes all our work and effort worthwhile. I'm sure there's areas that we haven't touched on and there's more to learn. Hopefully you've gone away with a bit more information. Like I say, come and talk to us at the end. Go and enjoy your food, have a drink, talk to everyone else in the room. But like I say, thank you. We will provide a bit of feedback, or you provide a bit of feedback to help us. And have a safe journey home, but good to see you all. Thank you.